Hi, my name is Bob Graham, and I have written a 2-volume novel called Apocalypses. The second volume was just published last week. So I'm excited about both. They are sequential, and I want to talk a little bit about the subject matter. I think this novel will challenge you. I think it will excite you. It's historical fiction suspense. So if you like history, you're going to like this. Apocalypses means, or apocalypsis in the singular, means the final and total destruction of the world as it is envisioned by the writer of the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible. So I deal with two historical strands in which that macrocosmic picture is shown. The first one, the first historical strand, comes to us in the 1860s, particularly in December of 1862, the start of the Civil War Battle of Fredericksburg. It began on December 11th and reached its terrible, terrible height on December 13th. What I'm dealing with is the fighting, sometimes hand-to-hand, that took place on December 11th. So let me talk about that historical strand and how the idea of apocalypse plays into that. First of all, the main characters on the Union side, and if you can picture in your mind 150,000 troops or so on the Union side on a bluff stretching for miles, looking down at the city, the village of Fredericksburg, and General Burnside, who is in control of the Union forces. He doesn't want to be there, by the way. He wished that Lincoln hadn't appointed him, but he's stuck. And so what he plans to do is bombard that city to rubble. And also he's establishing pontoon bridges to cross the Rappahannock River, which separates the Union forces from the Confederate forces under Robert E. Lee and his great general, Stonewall Jackson, who line the bluffs behind Fredericksburg. So you have two great armies that are about to clash. And so the characters on the Union side, there are three who are important. One is a Reverend Vermeulen, whose father was a minister, and he's joined because he wants to be shot and killed, believe it or not. And he wants to be shot and killed because he lost his daughter to appendicitis, which was deadly back then. And he's married to a wife who he believes is unconscionable, understandably, as you'll find out in the novel. But he doesn't have the courage to end his life. But he does think that if he dies as a patriot fighting for the Union cause, if he's shot and killed, that even though he doubts, he's a lapsed cleric and doubts the existence of God, that God will have mercy and he will be transported above the battlefield and will be reunited with Abby, his beloved 12-year-old daughter. So that's why he enters the war. There's another man on the Union side named Jean, Jean, and he's a recent immigrant from France. And he's there because he believes that Christ will come again in his lifetime. In fact, he believes that Christ will come again after the Battle of Fredericksburg or during the Battle of Fredericksburg. That Fredericksburg for him is Armageddon, the last battle, and Christ will be revealed. And Jean believes that Christ is perhaps Stonewall Jackson, the great, great Confederate general. And, you know, we know that hymns were sung to Stonewall Jackson, that he was beloved, and he was a larger-than-life figure. So Jean believes that this battle will lead to the destruction and Christ coming again. And in the 19th century in America, this was common thinking. This is not off the charts by any stretch, that there were a lot of movements that thought that the end of the world was coming in their lifetime, like William Miller, who thought in 1843 that He had a little church near the Vermont-New York border, and he said the end is coming in 1843. So they all dressed in white robes and got ready for Armageddon and what was to follow, and nothing happened. And then what Miller did was simply sharpen the date to October 22nd, 1844. Well, you had other groups doing the same thing. So what we find then is this kind of fever for the end times. And my novel has relevance for what's happening today, I think. That understanding that the apocalypse is around the corner, and maybe COVID-19 was the beginning of that. So you have Jean and you have Reverend Vermeulen, who will go down, and there's one other character too, named Dingo. So there's this triumvirate on the Union side, and Dingo is a different character. He's the son of a Boston Brahmin, a physician, and he's in the war because he's interested in raping and killing, because that's what he's done his whole life. Not killing, but the former. And the idea for him, under the guise of patriotism, is to go into Fredericksburg and shoot and rape women. That's what he's into. His name is Arthur Jr., but he goes by Mad Dog or Dingo. That's what he wants to be called. So these three will cross over the pontoon bridge and under heavy fire, because the Confederate sharpshooters on Sophia Street, which parallels the Rappahannock River, are ready for them. So we see this initial incursion, which begins the Battle of Fredericksburg. I want to talk about Mad Dog a little bit, because once he gets across the river, he's wounded, but not by a bullet, what they used to call a Minié bullet, but rather by a round bullet, which was fired not by a rifled musket, which had grooves, but a regular musket. So it only carried 100 yards at best, whereas a rifled musket with a Minié bullet could strike a target and kill it at 200 yards, 250 yards. So Dingo, Mad Dog, gets wounded, and he decides, and he's far from his platoon, his company. He's on his own. So he decides, although he can't fire his musket, his rifled musket from England, his beloved musket, he can't fire that the way he wants to. He has to use the other shoulder. He gets onto Sophia Street and he starts to kill, because by the time he's on Sophia Street, the smoke is so thick that in hand-to-hand fighting, you're not sure who you're fighting. That's what war was like, that you couldn't see. It was more than a mist. It was like a curtain of smoke that you had to kind of find your way through. He does. And he kills this older man. He's called the veteran. And after he shoots the veteran, he tricks the veteran into turning his back, because Dingo pretends to be Stonewall Jackson, and the veteran is addled. Before the war, he's a little bit addled. He kills him, and he sees the woman who is helping him, and decides she's ripe for the picking. He's going to follow her, chase her, close the gap, rape her, and kill her. And her name is Lucy Ayres, and she's a finishing school mistress. Her husband died of tuberculosis, consumption, it was called back then, and they had no children, so her girls, they became her children, they became her loves, they became her purpose for living. So Dingo sees Lucy Ayres and begins to follow her, to track her. She has seen what's happened to her dear friend, the beloved veteran. She starts running from him. They pick up speed. He closes the gap. And then suddenly, whether it's friendly fire or whether it's a Confederate sharpshooter, he gets shot in the lower right leg, turning that lower right leg into pulp. And Lucy Ayres scoots, makes a sharp, divergent right turn, into a home that is not hers, but it's open, it's unlocked, and she pries it open and awaits. Dingo falls, he's injured, he has to try to get up. He can't, so he crawls through the door. He still wants to destroy this woman, this daughter of the South. Well, what happens is that does not happen. She pushes a hutch on him, and he is rendered helpless. When we find him next, his leg has been amputated because Lucy Ayres has taken compassion on him, and they've had a brief dialogue before that. But here's this prim, proper, finishing school mistress helping this guy who was trying to kill her. Why? Is it simply Christian charity? No. No, it's because there's a part of her that dislikes who she's become, socially ascendant, doing all the proper things that a good Southern woman would do to get that, to own her own business, finishing school business, and all that entails. And he shows her a darker side of life. And in the end, he's an amputee now, and he says, finally, after the battle of Fredericksburg ends, and he's still there, he says, I'm getting out of here. And she hisses at him, you can get out, but you're not leaving without me. And eventually they'll marry. So when I talk about apocalypse on a personal level, what I'm talking about is, in one of the stories, a woman who just obliterates everything she was to pursue a relationship that one can barely fathom. So that's one understanding of apocalypse on a personal nature. We'll see Reverend Vermeulen, who is also injured in the battle, and what happens to his life because he will meet a woman named Corinne, who is really, she's a mixed race, although she doesn't know it, and her mother never tells her. But Corinne will play an important part in this story. She'll rescue Reverend Vermeulen, who's injured. She'll rescue him, even though he's a Union soldier. She'll rescue him because she thinks he saved the life of her younger brother, who was supposed to leave with the women and children right before the battle began. But young Perry, 12-year-old Perry, decides that he wants to stay and fight. And so he comes back. He's on the field before the battle begins, and he sees picnic baskets. Now, his mother and a couple of other women left picnic baskets with pies in them for the enemy. The enemy doesn't know, however, that the pies are laced with strychnine. And this has a certain contemporary congruence, I suppose, because that's what happened in the Ukraine. When Ukrainians fled, they left all sorts of goodies for the Russian soldiers when they barreled into a home to eat, and they were laced with poison. So Perry does not know that these pies that his mother has baked are poison. So he eats, and he's lying on the field. Vermeulen, who's been shot in the side, not seriously a flesh wound, encounters this boy. And he checks the pulse and understands the boy's not dead. And the boy's not speaking, but Vermeulen prays, and he says the prayer of a lapsed cleric might not count at all, but he's selfish too. He says, I can't stay here. I need to get closer to the enemy line to be shot for good and killed. Well, what happens is he's not shot for good. The percussive, explosive force of a cannonball near him lifts him into the air and drops him on his back on Sophia Street. Meanwhile, Perry comes to life, it seems, because Jean, our friend who believes in the apocalypse, also has a magical talisman. And he tells the soldiers, the Union soldiers in his platoon, that if they just hold that talisman, they won't die. It's a magical talisman. If they hold it, they won't die. And so Perry shows up with, along with his sister and with his sister's mother, their mother, in the basement of a home, and he's alive. And they said, how are you alive? And he says, a woman healed him, not a woman, but a minister healed him. And Corinne thinks it's Reverend Vermeulen, but it's not. It's Jean and his magical talisman. So that's part of that story. Also, I need to say that in the 1860s, I'll be in the novel, Slave John plays an important part. I do a lot with the Underground Railroad. Literally, Slave John is boxed up in Richmond, Virginia, and sent to Philadelphia. And finally, he'll land with his older brother in Hurley, New York. So I want to say about this novel that there is a lot of local history. The final chapter in Volume 1, excuse me, takes place on West Chestnut Street. It's a violent chapter. It's a stunning chapter. It takes place on West Chestnut Street. The Rondout becomes important. The village of the Rondout becomes important, as does Kingston. You know, what were the stores in Uptown Kingston? I described those. And finally, in one of the tumultuous endings, the cornfield in Hurley then becomes the meeting place of Corinne, who finally meets with her father, the slave, who cries out for mercy because she's mistreated him throughout their lives together in Fredericksburg. She didn't know that Slave John was her father, but she had a sense. So that's just one of the plot lines in the 1860s story. The other historical narrative takes place in 2nd century, what is now Turkey, with a man who actually existed named Montanus. He believed that he was God the Father Almighty, and that his two women friends are the completion of the Trinity, God the Son and God the Holy Spirit, that this is the new Trinity, and that in the 2nd century the world would come to an end in Turkey. So I try to write about how he believed in this, how he tried to live it, and how he tried to escape that destiny, which he does. In so doing, he will go to the great healing center, the Asclepian in Pergamum. I've spent a fair amount of time in Turkey, so and I explored what's left of that. And really, I try to paint a positive picture of paganism, particularly the cult of Asclepius, which was a healing cult. And, you know, so what I do is try to characterize his struggle and how it finally resolves for him. And there is an apocalypse that takes place. And when I say it takes place, it's not that the world ends, but something fantastic happens to him. And let me say that this is a thinking reader's novel because the 2 volumes kind of take off with Dante's Divine Comedy. So the first volume talks about the 13th century writer Dante and how he describes the journey, his journey through Inferno, which I interpret as Fredericksburg, Purgatorio, which I interpret as the quest for meaning through the hardships of life, and finally Paradiso. And what is Paradiso? What is paradise for us, for you? It is a coming to terms, not with what someday heaven might be like, but what heaven might be like here. And it's a heaven not filled with, no problematics. It's a heaven which is problematic in many ways. And what I find, one of the themes of the novel is the search, children's searches for lost fathers, Corinne's seeking and finding her father in a slave house in a Hurley, New York cornfield. And that is paradise. They will come together, they will embrace, but both of them realize how difficult the future together will be for a variety of reasons. So we have that picture. And also there's flashbacks to the 14th century, where a woman named Marguerite Porete was burned at the stake in Paris. Let me say that the women's movement for me really began in the 13th century, where women got together and they had this understanding that what God was after was not worship in churches or the Roman Catholic hierarchy, but the extinction of the ego. It's very Buddhist-like in some ways, their writings, Hadewisch and Mechthild of Magdeburg among two, and of course Marguerite Porete that I focus on. And you know, in the end, what Reverend Vermeulen will find is in his own apocalyptic vision, is that he will find and he will discover a trinity made up of women, of two girls. One, his dead daughter. Another, a girl in the Middle Ages who, I don't know whether she existed or not, but her father did exist, was a historical figure. And Marguerite Porete. And for him, these three will form a new kind of trinity. He has, Vermeulen is chasing Jeanne because Jeanne has shot him. Jeanne has shot him below Fredericksburg at a plantation called Mossnack. And it doesn't seem as if Vermeulen will survive, but he does. And so the second volume of this novel is his chasing Jeanne to get even. So that's a psychic breakdown, that the minister, who's supposed to be sweetness and love, only finds meaning in revenge and hatred, and he will follow Jeanne and try to kill him. But things will be upturned there too. Things will be upturned. But again, what we see is his quest to find validation by killing the man who almost killed him. So there are a lot of ties. And let me say, the endings are redemptive, but not in a Hallmark card sort of way. The endings are redemptive, and I look at Montanism and the movement he founded, which lasted until the 6th century. But I mourn the fact that orthodoxy tried to kill Montanists. They banned their books, they drove them underground, and that's my problem often, or I shouldn't say my problem, the novelist's problem with orthodoxy. Peter Berger was a sociologist who wrote a book called The Heretical Imperative, I think some 30 years ago, and I read it and loved it. And he said, the only way that religions move on is on the heels of heretics who bring home the essence of what Christ was trying to say, or what Buddha was trying to say, or what Muhammad was trying to say, you know. So I kind of follow that lead, and there's a sadness for me that Montanism was hunted and destroyed, and that's why I want to put a human face to this man. So look, I'm not going to say any more. I'm hoarse, and so I would ask you to buy the book for Sympathy for Me, because maybe I'm croaking. Maybe this is the start of, you know, I'm going to be in the hospital tomorrow for all I know. So buy my book. And you can get it on barnesandnoble.com. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it locally at Oblong Books in Rhinebeck. They have copies. And I will deliver if you live in Red Hook or Rhinebeck and you want a copy, either of Volume 1 or Volume 2, just bobgram55@gmail.com. I will autograph a copy and deliver it to you. Man, That works, right? I'm better than the Domino pizza delivery guy, and you don't have to tip me. Honestly, you don't. So thank you. I think this is a book worth reading. Kirkus Review gave it a great review. It said it was highly recommended, at least volume 1. Volume 2 just came out. So support a struggling, not young writer, but support a struggling old writer, and support your libraries, those libraries which support writing and writers. Thanks so much. Bless you all.